Welcome back. Today, we're diving into maybe the biggest question out there in the life sciences, this towering, really seductive puzzle of consciousness. And, the very feeling of having a self. How does plain old matter become mind?
Exactly. And we've got some fascinating source material shared by a listener, which really tries to cut through all the philosophical fog. It focuses instead on the biological circumstances, the nuts and bolts, that allow us to go from just existing to actually having what they call knowingness and selfness.
Right. So, our mission today is to unpack those mechanisms. We're going to look at why emotion and feeling aren't actually the same thing, which is something I think a lot of us get mixed up, and how there seem to be two really different kinds of consciousness operating at the same time. Plus, we'll explore what happens in these, well, radical neurological cases where brain damage strips away memory identity, but somehow the core self seems to hang on.
And the whole discussion really, it hinges on this fundamental question, this gap. If emotions are just, chemical signals, neural responses happening in the body and brain, how does that physical stuff, the substrate, ever become known to the organism that's having the emotion? I mean, to answer that, you really need a mechanism in the brain that creates this sense of self.
Okay, right. Let's start unpacking that maybe with the big picture first, because I think we often treat consciousness as just one thing. You're either conscious or you're not. But these sources, looking at the neurological evidence, they suggest that that idea, that monolith, is actually broken. It's more like there are simple and complex kinds existing together.
That's absolutely the crucial separation to grasp. The simpler sort of foundational layer, that's what the sources call core consciousness. It basically provides you, the organism, with a sense of self, but it's very much anchored right here, right now, in the present moment, in this place.
Okay, simple, stable, single level. When you describe it like that, it kind of raises a big question for me. Does that imply that the fundamental knower, the part of us that knows it exists, is somehow immune to change across our lives?
In a fundamental way, yes. Core consciousness is stable across your lifetime, and it doesn't rely on all that complex cognitive machinery we usually associate with the mind. It's actually something you share with many non-human species. It does not need conventional memory like remembering your breakfast or abstract reasoning or even language to function. It's more like this constant, unwavering background recognition that I am the one experiencing this right now.
Okay, I think I'm getting that. So if that's the bedrock, the foundation, where does my specific identity fit in? My personality, my history, everything that makes me me.
Ah, right. That's the other kind, extended consciousness. Now, this is complex. It's built upon that core consciousness foundation. And it's what gives you that elaborate sense of self placed within your own personal history. Think of it like this. Core consciousness is being aware of a sudden loud bang. Extended consciousness is realizing that bang sounded like your childhood firework nights. And wondering if your neighbor is setting some off early this year, it connects the now to the past and future.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. But it also makes extended consciousness sound like, well, a much riskier thing, evolutionarily speaking, since it depends on things like conventional memory, working memory, language things that seem pretty fragile, actually.
They can be fragile, yes, but the payoff, the biological advantage, was enormous. Consciousness, evolving this way, was truly path-breaking. Why? Because it managed to connect the deep inner world of life regulation, those ancient systems in the brainstem, the hypothalamus, that keep you alive with the brain's ability to process images, to think ahead.
So it's like connecting the basic life support system directly to the planning department.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. This connection allowed the organism to bring its core survival needs, its regulatory system, into contact with mental representations of the world.
Mm.
Suddenly, you could run simulations in your head, purposeful ones. You could manipulate images, preview different outcomes, and make much better plans for surviving and thriving. That's really the dawn of individual forethought.
Okay, that link between the primal bodily self and the planning brain, that leads us nicely into this hierarchy of experience you mentioned, which honestly I think is one of the trickiest parts for people to grasp, the difference between emotion, feeling, and then knowing you have a feeling. They sound so similar.
They do, and it's vital we clarify the distinctions based on these sources. So first, at the bottom, you have emotion. Think of emotions as these ancient, quite stereotyped patterns. They're complicated collections of chemical and neural responses in the body. Often they're actually quite public. You can see fear or joy on someone's face. Or they can be background states, like just a general sense of well-being or maybe unease.
Right. And their primary job isn't about, making us feel good or bad necessarily, but pure biological regulation. Survival. They change your blood flow, your breathing, hormone levels, all to get you ready for a specific action, like the classic fight or flight response.
Yeah,
They're pretty much biologically hardwired.
correct. Now, the next step up is feeling.
Hmm.
This is where things get internal. Feeling happens when those bodily patterns, the fast heartbeat, the tense muscles, the warmth spreading through you become images in the brain. Mental representations.
Mhm.
Feelings are inwardly directed, private experiences. They are, in essence, the perception of that emotional landscape your body is creating.
Okay, emotion is the body's response pattern. Feeling is the brain's perception of that pattern. Got it. But then why do we need that third stage you mentioned, knowing the feeling? Doesn't perceiving something imply you know it?
Not quite, or at least not in the way we mean knowing here. The full subjective impact of feelings, experiencing them as yours, seems to require the self. It's only when that sense of self, core consciousness, comes online that those private internal feelings become known to the individual having them. So the body is having the emotion, the brain maps it as a feeling, but it takes core consciousness to create the relationship. I am the one having this feeling right now.
Hmm. Okay, here's maybe a skeptical thought then. If emotions are so deeply tied to these ancient biological regulation systems, how much control do we actually have over them? We talk a lot about emotional intelligence, managing our emotions, but these sources seem to suggest we can't just turn them off at will.
It's a really sharp point. And the research seems to back that up pretty strongly. The mechanisms that trigger emotions often don't even require our conscious awareness to kick in. And crucially, they are not easily controlled by willpower. The sources suggest you're about as effective at stopping a genuine physiologically driven emotion midstream as you are at preventing a sneeze once it starts.
Huh. Okay, that's a good analogy. So we can maybe suppress the expression, put on a brave face, bite your tongue. But underneath, that whole biological cascade, the racing heart, the hormones, that's all still happening. The emotion runs its course, whether we show it or not.
Pretty much. It suggests that maybe emotional intelligence is often less about controlling the start of an emotion and more about how we manage the consequences, the expression, and our behavioral response after it's already rolling.
Right. We manage the output, maybe, but not the engine itself.
Exactly. And the neurological case studies are just incredibly illuminating here. They really let us see these different layers, self, memory, emotion pulled apart. It's like reverse engineering the mind by seeing what happens when bits are broken.
Yeah, the clearest examples, the proof maybe, that the core self is separate from detailed memory, comes from these patients with just devastating brain damage, but who somehow remain there.
Absolutely. Take the case of David. He's often described as perhaps the most profoundly amnesic patient ever studied. He had herpes simplex encephalitis, which caused massive damage to key brain areas, both temporal lobes, including the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory, and the amygdala, important for emotion. The result: he can't learn any new facts. He can barely recall any old facts about his life. He doesn't recognize his family, his doctors, day to day. It's a truly profound loss of personal history.
It's hard to even imagine that's his entire extended consciousness just wiped out.
Yeah.
Yet the descriptions say he's consistently awake and alert.
Yes. His core consciousness is remarkably intact. He maintains attention. He shows normal background emotions. Apparently, his mood just flows along like a wide, calm river. And he engages in purposeful behavior. The classic example is him playing a game of checkers. He can learn the moves, play strategically, and actually win.
Yeah.
But if you ask him just moments later, he has absolutely no memory of playing the game, doesn't know its name, can't recall the rules, doesn't know who he was playing with.
Wow. That's the punchline, isn't it? David demonstrates pretty definitively that factual knowledge, specific details, autobiographical memories, is not needed for core consciousness to function. The basic sense of self, of being present, runs on a much simpler and maybe more resilient operating system than we tend to think.
Precisely. Now contrast David with another famous case, patient S. She had a rare genetic condition, Urbach-White disease, which led to the specific destruction, the calcification of her amygdala on both sides of the brain. And the amygdala is known to be absolutely vital for processing and experiencing the emotion of fear.
Okay, so unlike David, S has perfectly good memory, right? High intelligence.
Flawless memory, yes.
Yeah.
High intelligence. But she literally cannot feel fear. She also struggles to recognize fear in other people's faces or even mimic a fearful expression herself. And this lack of fear makes her, well, reckless. inappropriately trusting. The reports mention her being overly friendly, hugging strangers, and sadly being exploited because she lacks that internal alarm system that signals danger or untrustworthiness.
So her fearlessness prevents her from learning from negative experiences, essentially.
Exactly. Her body and brain never get that danger
Yeah.
signal linked to certain situations or people. But here's a fascinating twist. In one experiment, they set up a situation where she had to choose which of two people she preferred to interact with. One was presented as pleasant, the other subtly conveyed negative nonverbal cues. A bad guy, essentially, though played by a perfectly nice neuropsychologist. The bad guy was actually quite physically attractive.
Okay, so normally attractiveness might sway you, but she lacks the fear-distrust signal. So what happened?
Despite not consciously recognizing the bad guy as threatening, and despite his attractiveness, S consistently chose the pleasant person over 80% of the time.
Oh. So even without feeling fear consciously, some kind of negative emotional signal triggered non-consciously by the behavior must have registered.
It seems so. That underlying negative emotional value, maybe disgust or unease, triggered non-consciously, still subtly guided her decision-making, overriding other factors like looks. It shows her core consciousness, her ability to know and choose is intact. But that specific, vital emotion of fear is just gone because its dedicated neural machinery, the amygdala, is gone. It suggests specific emotions are somewhat modular, but the core knower persists even without them.
That's incredible. Okay, one more case, Emily. She had face blindness, prosopagnosia.
Yes, due to damage in her visual association cortex. She couldn't visually recognize unique faces, couldn't pick out her daughter in a photo, couldn't even recognize her own face in a mirror, but she could recognize people by their voices, and her other cognitive functions were fine.
And like David and S, she was perfectly conscious, attentive, emotionally normal.
Completely. But the really crucial insight from Emily's case is this. She was conscious not only of what she knew, like recognizing a voice, but she was also acutely conscious of what she did not know. She could look at her daughter's photo, know intellectually it was her daughter, but experience the conscious awareness of failing to get that visual recognition match. She knew she should know the face and knew she didn't.
Ah, I see. So core consciousness is like this central resource, the awareness itself. It survives even when the specific information it's supposed to be processing, like face data, is missing or defective. The mechanism making her aware that she is the knower is separate from the mechanism that delivers the actual content, the what is known.
Beautifully put. In all these cases, they really point us towards the deeper non-conscious origins of this self, what the sources term the proto-self.
Okay, proto-self. That sounds a bit abstract. How can we ground that? What is it physically?
Well, think of it as your body's constant non-conscious internal surveillance system. It's this coherent collection of neural patterns that are continuously mapping the current physical state of your organism. We're talking about the internal milieu, blood sugar, oxygen levels, things like that. The state of your dessert, your gut, your heart, your lungs, and your vestibular system, your sense of balance and position in space. It's the reason you have an immediate background sense of whether you're feeling generally well or tense or maybe a bit off, even if you're not actively thinking about your body. It's the non-conscious biological baseline.
Okay, so it's like a constant, real-time biological status report running below conscious awareness.
Exactly. And core consciousness, that first flicker of self-awareness, seems to emerge when the brain's consciousness-making mechanisms essentially read or operate on this non-conscious proto-self report. It generates that immediate pre-verbal knowledge that the state of my own organism has just been altered by interacting with something, maybe an external object, maybe an internal thought or memory.
And this is why the location of brain damage matters so much, isn't it? Why messing with the deep, old parts of the brain is so catastrophic for consciousness itself.
Precisely. Core consciousness seems to depend most critically on these evolutionarily ancient structures deep within the brain, the primal engine room, you could call it. We're talking about the upper brainstem, the hypothalamus, the basal forebrain. These areas are the absolute bedrock of life regulation, controlling metabolism, sleep-wake cycles, basic reflexes, the body's fundamental chemical state.
Which explains that paradox we saw with the case studies. Damage higher up, in the cortex, affecting complex things like memory or face recognition, like with David or Emily, leaves the core self surprisingly intact. But damage to those deep, ancient structures that support the proto-self, that generate that basic life state map.
Yeah. That's what leads to the profound disruptions of core consciousness itself. States like coma, persistent vegetative state, akinetic mutism. It strongly suggests that this highest mental function, knowing you exist, is fundamentally anchored to the most ancient systems managing the organism's moment-to-moment survival. The knower is built right on top of the life support machinery.
It's a powerful idea, but we should probably also remember, as the sources point out, that consciousness is still just the tip of the iceberg, right? The vast majority of what our brain does, our mental processing, remains non-conscious. All those neural patterns that never become conscious images, all the learned habits and skills stored away, all the innate biological know-how that keeps us breathing and our hearts beating.
Absolutely, it's a vast hidden world of processing. And that's partly why the search for a single central controller in the brain, a homunculus, failed. It led some people to doubt the very existence of a self. But the evidence we've discussed suggests something like a self does exist biologically. It emerges as this primordial, non-verbal story the organism tells itself about its own state as it interacts with the world.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've explored how core consciousness, that basic foundation of self-awareness, seems inseparable from the immediate, constantly changing state of your own body, the proto-self, and the feelings arising from it. It suggests it's not really language or your vast store of memories that makes you feel present in your in this very moment. It's more about this continuous, maybe low-level pulsing of your biological awareness.
And if that biological anchor, that reliance on the body constantly signaling its internal state, is key to solving the puzzle of consciousness. Well, here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given how often we tend to use our thinking minds to perhaps override, ignore, or even actively hide our body's internal signals, what new insights, what deeper understanding might you gain about yourself, about your experience, simply by trying to pay closer, quieter attention to your body's own nonverbal account of the world and your place within it?